Thanks for joining for this episode of the TechSpective podcast. I have Will from Enable. So, Will, if you could introduce yourself, give a little bit of background on Enable for anyone who's not familiar, and let's get into it.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Tony, for having me. And thanks to the listeners that are here hanging out. Really appreciate you all coming and joining also to listen to this old man ramble. And I say me, not Tony. So a little bit about myself, right? I've been in this world now for over 25 years. I started off at a pretty big company that everybody is quite familiar with, but I'm not going to say their name. And, my career has just been very, very lucky, I would say. I've done a number of different things from IT to IT security to operations to SOX, and that's exactly where I am now. As a crazy old man, I also decided to join the United States Air Force a couple of years ago. So I am a cyber warrior and defender there, and helping protect the U.S. On these levels. So a little bit about Enable. What is it that we're really, really about, right? So for us, we're really trying to push the what you can get from one basically vendor, right? We can give you that full scope breadth of protection, visibility, and if it happens, recovery. So, monitoring your systems using RMM applications, getting security using applications such as Lumen and the MDR SOC team that we have here also. And then if it comes to it, maybe just a server crashes or something major occurs, we help you with backup as well. And the real, at least that I have seen, Tony, beneficial wise is, I'll give you a quick story. I'm a storyteller. And every time I say I'm going to tell you a story, it's a real item. It's not something I'm fictitiously making up. And so we had an incident. It was about a year ago now at this point. And bad guy comes in, hitting some 0-day items that nobody knew about, gets inside of the environment and really starts wreaking havoc. He finally tripped on a signal that we had trapped and laid. We figure out what's going on. We go in there, get the attacker contained, and then calling the customer, talking with the customer. Customer says, "Hey, what do I need to know?" Well, based on everything scientifically that we're seeing in the logs, this is when they got in. So run a backup at this time window. And start to finish, this is really where I freak out and I geek out on, Tony, is start to finish is this whole engagement from attacker breaching an environment, us identifying, containing, and them being back into operationals through backup was 4 hours long. In my lifetime, I would never expect to ever say, even at that scale, to be able to say 4 hours you can recover from a potentially extinction event attack. That's really what Enable is really pushing as our message to say, like, we can help you get through these things if it happens.
Okay. I wanted to talk a little bit about the SOC report. I talked with John when we were at RSA. And the data, shows that I think it was like roughly half attacks, or more than half of the attacks, never even touch an endpoint. The industry, I've worked in cybersecurity for quite a while. I've worked with Alert Logic on the MDR side. I've worked with Cybereason on an endpoint, more of an XDR endpoint protection side. I feel like our focus is generally on endpoint, or there's a strong focus on endpoint. I think there's a lot more focus now on identity as like the perimeter and things like that. But we still have a lot of focus on endpoint, which doesn't seem to be supported by what you're seeing. So, like, what are your thoughts on that?
And you're not wrong, right, on that, right? And so I really attribute a lot of this to what we all as a global species went through a few years ago, right? Which was essentially the COVID outbreak, right? And we've had other outbreaks in the past, but I don't think anything as big as this, to where we had multiple and basically a lot of countries isolating from others. And so what did that do, right? That forced the industry to very quickly try to say, we need to protect the endpoint, because all of a sudden everybody starts working remote. right? When you have everybody in office, well, you have your defense in depth at the office, right? You have your perimeter defenses, you have your firewalls, your switches, your routers, and all the way down to the endpoint, your IAM. You have all those things. But when COVID hit, it really changed the game of the world. And well, recently, Tony, a lot of companies have been pushing what? Like, what do you read in the news? What are companies saying? Back to the office. Let's get back to the office, right? Stop with the remote things. So, from an attacker landscape, where do you think their attacks are going to start navigating back to? Back towards the other things that aren't technically just the endpoints. And that was really the shift that we saw in our latest state of the SOC report, right? We saw that shift against the endpoint to go against, once again, the perimeter, once again, the edge devices, and once again, the cloud. And so that was really the big change that we saw last year, especially because of the businesses doing these things. So it's really interesting in my mind, Tony, is that, like threat actors are thinking, what are the businesses doing also, right? Like where can we really attack and go after and follow those trails in order to drive that success for, at least for them, in what they would consider success.
Okay, which makes sense, and I think the other thing, though, I would step back and say, like, I feel like a lot of times when we have these conversations, we paint in broad stereotypes, and say, well, attackers are this or attackers are, and the thing is, attackers are, there's attackers across the spectrum. So I'm sure there's still, there's attackers doing it every which way you can imagine. But we can talk about kind of the general trends of, like, okay, well, yes, there's still attackers doing it that way, and there's going to be attackers doing it that way over there. But the trend is, we're kind of going in this direction.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely correct. That was the trend that we witnessed, and you're right. Whether it's a mafia, hacktivist, a state level, somebody doing it out of their own, like, hey, they're trying to show how cool they are for other threat actors, right? To want to get into their ops. Yeah, everybody's going to do it differently, and they're all going to have different intentions. But that was the trend from last year, as we did see the switch from the endpoint to go back towards the perimeters.
Okay, well, and for years now, so this has been accelerated or expanded in the age of generative and now agentic AI. But even before that, I was already having conversations about identity as the new perimeter. Like we were talking for years, going back to before 2015 about, the perimeter is dead because of BYOD, because of mobile. It's like the traditional, Tony's going to be sitting at this cubicle in this office on this desktop PC had already kind of eroded to where, well, I might be connecting from my laptop over here, I might be on my phone, off at Starbucks, whatever. And it's like, so the concept of, hey, I'm in my office, in my cube, and there's a firewall, and those defenses was already eroding to some extent. But then, like you said, COVID definitely accelerated that, and AI and agentic AI, like agentic AI in particular, accelerates it even further because, like, all of those things are identities as well. And that's a piece that I think is often missed in the conversation. And when we talk about identity, is I think a lot of people tend to think of that in terms of Tony Bradley as my username and password to log into something or whatever, which is true, but there's also my laptop, there's also my router, there's also my refrigerator, like all of these things have their machine identities, there are software application identities, and now we have AI agent identities. And so, like, those things make up the vast majority of the identity landscape. And if an attacker can get that, then most of your other defenses kind of become irrelevant. It's like, well, if I have your identity and I can log in as you, then your security is irrelevant.
I'm really glad you brought this up, Tony, and I wish we would have talked earlier, because this is exactly where I've been thinking as well. And you're 100% correct. AI is just another identity. And what makes it even harder from what we're seeing on the SOC side is a lot of the authentications that the agentic AIs are using, at least at the end user levels, are tied to the normal user. So when we're seeing these things actually being executed, even at the agentic level, it's still tied back to the user. It's not yet, depending on the setup, right? But the majority of the stuff that we're seeing is still tied as an identity that's not its own entity yet, such as your fridge, right? And I'm sure your fridge has a username and password and all that also. So it uses that authentication method, but then gains its own identity. And you hit something really, really, really amazing. And I was talking about it actually last week at a conference that Enable has. It's called Empower. And I was telling, so my little sister, a little quick little side story. My little sister, she works for a law firm. She calls me one day and she's like, brother, this law firm just spent $1 million on this AI thing, and I have no idea what to do with it, but they put me in charge of it. And they asked me if I know AI, and I say, yeah, I know how to use, GPT. And so they made me in charge of it. And she's like, I don't know what to do. And I'm like, well, good luck. Right. But it opens a bigger question that people really aren't thinking about. And you hit it on the nail also, is so companies right now are bringing in all these AIs, bringing in all these agents. But as a threat actor, what am I going to want to go and actually own? Right. What are the four common things that a threat actor at whatever level really their goals are, right? When they're attacking? Well, it's exfiltration, ransomware, espionage, or complete destruction. I really don't see any others outside of those four. So if we know that you're going to do ransomware and encrypt the data so that way you can know the end users have to pay you, well, what do you think the next target's going to be? And I think you're actually thinking about it also. It is going to be the agentic AIs, right? And what's going to happen is, in reality, right, you're going to have companies and they're going to say, hey, we're augmenting people, we're doing all these things, we're bringing in AI, we're bringing up efficiencies. And eventually, as much as I hate to say it, I don't want this to be true, but I think it's going to be true, is companies will probably downsize a little bit on their workforce to lean on their employees to use AI. But if you now have an employee, let's think 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 years out. If you now have an employee and you now have an operation in your company that is so AI centric, what happens when you take out the AI? Can we go back to pen and paper? Can the company even operate at that level? So to me, that's going to be the next real targets that the threat actors are going to start going after in the near future. It's just, that's another thing here. We didn't publish it on the state of the SOC. On this one, we're talking about how we're using AI here for success. But for me, those are things that we're already looking to protect and to identify as a company here at Enable.
Yeah. It will be interesting because those things will inevitably, it will come up on some level. Like, and it doesn't even have to be a cybersecurity thing. Like, even if you look at like the study that came out some point last year talking about how people in general are bad at maps because we have GPS. It's like, so we've like lost this ability to navigate by following a paper map. And it's like, well, I've got my phone, so I don't need that. And it's like, okay, but if the whole network went down and all you had was a physical map, you might still want to be able to get from point A to point B.
Exactly.
And to your point, like there are different things that, like, it's great that we have all this automation. It's great that we have tools and we can streamline things. We can increase productivity, but organizations should still also be thinking about, okay, but what if we didn't have that? Or think about it from like one industry that I can think of that definitely has thought through these things is the medical, healthcare industry. Like a hospital has contingencies for their contingencies of like, hey, if all of this stuff goes down, we still have to be able to triage and treat people and perform surgeries, like even if all of the technology dies.
That's absolutely correct. And what gets even scarier to just stay in that vein just a touch more is, I keep hearing, robotic surgeries and all these other things. So, is our future gonna just, what happens if it goes down? Like you said, what if there's an act of nature that brings out all the power and all of a sudden you're in the middle of a surgery, right? You have backup generators. Okay, cool. Just like you said, contingencies are contingencies. But at some point, I would envision that the contingencies eventually end and do you have the expertise on hand in order to continue doing those operations, especially at a medical level, not even just
Yeah.
cybersecurity?
Well, so so this ties back to a broader thing, which that I talked about with John, and that I think that Enable has focused on and talked about, which is there's a lot of talk lately about cyber resilience, and like you walk around the RSA floor or whatever, and 7 out of 10 booths have the word cyber resilience or whatever on there somewhere, and it's like that's great. You should have cyber resilience, but I think the conversation that needs to be had is to say, okay, but that's just one piece of business resilience. Like you need resilience on a broader scale. And actually, I'll give another example that's related. I did a lot of work way back when in terms of compliance and compliance frameworks. I worked on. I wrote PCI compliance with Anton Chivak, and so like, but you go back to like PCI, SOX, GLBA, all of these things, and I had been working on that stuff for years before I kind of stopped and said, we talk about compliance a lot in cybersecurity, and we talk about SOX, and we talk about GLBA, and we talk about GDPR. But what we often miss or don't talk about is that those frameworks, those regulations are broader than cybersecurity. Like the part that we're complying with is one facet of the regulation. It's not the regulation. And so I think that's true here with resilience too. So it's the same. So this is the same thing. Like we tend to view it through a sort of myopic cybersecurity lens and say, okay, well, we've achieved compliance,
right?
And it's like, well, yes, you've achieved compliance with your subset of the bigger thing, right. And so the same thing is true here with resilience. You can say, okay, well, I've done all the things. I've got the pieces in place. I've got my backup plans. I've got my recovery plans. We are cyber resilient, and it's like, okay, but will your business survive?
Exactly. And so I'm going to let you in on a little secret here, Tony, and the listeners as well, right? And I don't know if it's noticeable in the State of the SOC report, but the theme, there's a theme and there's a reason why I picked the theme. And the theme, do you want to take a guess? I don't know if you had a good chance to truly go in depth to see if there's a theme there or not. It's hard to pick up.
No, I would say that the main thing that I kind of got was what we were just talking about. So so enlighten me.
So it is at like the very high level at the intro page there is right, where it says defense in depth, and it says defense in depth wins. But why did I want to really drive a defense in depth theme? Well, that's because I feel a lot of us, like just so many of us, have been so enwrapped in get this technology, buy this COTS thing, let's do this, let's get that, let's do this, let's get these check marks, let's do these compliance, let's make sure ISO and all these things, NIST and all this. But we've forgotten the fundamentals. And that's why I really wanted to go with the defense in depth, because when it comes down to it, as you mentioned earlier, the identity, the perimeter, the cloud, if you don't have the fundamentals in place, everything else is kind of, why are you doing it, right? Why do you have these things like, why are you spending all this money? And so the compliance piece that you were just bringing up is an important one, but I'm with you 100%. If it's just to check the box, it's really not doing more for you, right? And then How often do you review it? How often are you going back to it? How often are you going beyond that? And if it's just to be like, oh, we're SOC 2 compliant, boom, awesome, here's our paper, we got our cert, cool. But are you, like, the things that scare me the most is when, like, I go to some, I don't know, like a lawyers or doctors or whatever, and they're like, oh, can we have your social security? And I'm like, whoa, what? All right, what level of algorithms are you using for your encryption? Is your data at rest encrypted, data in transmit encrypted? Like, what are you guys doing? And then I forget who it was, somebody the other day, they were like, hey, well, can you send me an email? And I was like, sure. And they sent me a Yahoo email. And I was like, All right. Do you remember back when every single Yahoo thing was hacked? Every single user was hacked? Like, and you're still using Yahoo? Okay. Like, nothing against Yahoo, by the if there's any Yahoo's fans on here, right? Nothing against them. I'm just saying we all have to do our due diligence. And I think you really hit a good point there, Tony, on talking about like it has to be more than just that. And the more is really the components of enable what John was talking to you about, right? In terms of, hey, if you get this piece and get this piece and get this piece, it really injects an ability to help survive an attack, such as the 4-hour story that I gave you earlier.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, it's been a while since I've had to use the phrase, but like for years, I would say, when there was so much more focus on compliance. I feel like we don't talk about it as much anymore. But I would always kind of point out to people, I'm like, look, if you follow the fundamentals and best practices, if you do the right things for security, you will probably be compliant. But if you just check the boxes to be compliant, you will not necessarily be secure. Like those two things is not a two-way street. Like you can be compliant without being secure. And it is possible to be secure without being compliant, probably too. It depends on the framework. But ultimately, like the compliance frameworks only have so much value. I mean, when you look at the breaches that have happened, whether it's Target or Sony or whatever, they were compliant. It's like It's not like you can point to it and say, oh, well, they got breached because they weren't compliant with SOX or they weren't compliant with PCI. It was like no, they were compliant.
Yep.
They got breached anyway.
100%. Yeah, you could. I'm going to go off on a little side story, not related to State of the SOC. Sorry. I had an interview a few years back, and I'm talking with the interviewer, and he worked for NASA, and he tells me, he goes, Will, if I give you $5 million, give me a percentage of how secure we would be. Right, such as like, oh, with $5 million, I can get us to 50% secure. Essentially, is what he was looking for. And I said, 5 million, I get us up to about 88%. He said, 88? Why not 100? Why not 100? I said, it's very simple. No one will be 100% secure. I mean, look at what's happening right now with Mythos, right? Granted, that requires a ton of kernel level items, but it's highlighting a ton of things that are vulnerable, right, in our world. And so even if I would have went and spent the $5 million on everything, just as you said, here, we got this, it's really and you said it, it's just, can you survive it? And for many years, Tony, I'm sure you've had this conversation also. For many years, everybody's like, well, if an attack happens, right? You're talking to a CEO and like, if an attack happens, we'll then we'll deal with it. But then it changed into, well, not an if, but a when, right? And now it's not even a win. It's, can you survive it is really what it is. That's really the mindset that leaders need to be in, is we're going to be attacked. And when we're attacked, can we come out of it?
Well, and there's like, I'm in a broader sense and irrelevant to this conversation, I'm anti-insurance. I think all of insurance is a scam, but there is a mentality to it to say, to the extent that it has any value, it only has value if you've prepared, if you've planned. You can't go buy auto insurance after you crash. You can't buy homeowners insurance after the hurricane hits. You have to have done the steps first so that you're ready when the thing happens. And that is very true in the cybersecurity realm as well. It's like, well, it's not a matter of if, it is a matter of when. And the thing is, you can't decide to do the right thing after you get hit.
Yep. And that's why it's back to the fundamentals. And for me, I learned defense in depth, and I think you were highlighting it. It's an old item, and it absolutely is an old item. I learned it from an old Army cyber individual back in 2003, right? And so and I'm not saying my military background goes that far. I'm just saying that was a mentor that I had even that far back, and they were telling me it's all about defense in depth. And I feel even more so today that that is even still just as relevant because, as you were mentioning, the AIs, we got to, we got to protect these, we got to do these. And how I was saying, like, this is going to be the next target. It's all just a defense in depth add-on, right? It's another identity that we have to protect. We have to add defenses to protect those items.
Well, so I think, and we're kind of winding down. I think a good sort of takeaway, a good message for the audience in general is that those fundamentals that we talked about 20, 30 years ago, defense in depth, just core principles of cybersecurity have not changed really. Like, yes, they've evolved, they've adapted, like the attack surface has changed, the threat landscape has changed, everything has changed, but the fundamentals are still the fundamentals. And so doing the fundamentals still gets you, in a Pareto principle sort of way, it gets you 80% of the way there. Like if you can just do the fundamentals, you're gonna eliminate a good portion of your risk.
Yep. Yeah, 100%. I 100% agree with you, and that's what I hope people take away from this, right? Is just don't forget the fundamentals, stay on top of those items, keep pushing the edge, keep pushing the future, but also don't leave yourself vulnerable to an item just because you potentially check marked a box, right? When we were talking about the frameworks earlier.
Yeah. No, I think it's a good lesson. It's a good lesson that transcends technology and cybersecurity. I mean, you can look at a football team, baseball team, whatever, and say, okay, well, yeah, there are things you can do, things change, but like the fundamentals are still the fundamentals. Like there are just certain things you just have to do to win or to defend or whatever. And that's true of pretty much anything. But so I want to thank you for taking the time. I also want to thank you for your service. And I was going to say, my service actually does go back further than that. So like I was also in the Air Force, but I was in the Air Force in the Desert Shield, Desert Storm time frame. So I was deployed to Turkey during Desert Storm.
Well, Tony, thank you. I'm sure you've heard it a ton, but thank you for your sacrifices for the freedoms that we get to enjoy.
And you as well. So, well, thank you for taking the time to join me. It was a fun conversation.
Same. Thank you all.
All right. Take care.